Good evening. Hello, District 6 residents. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful sunny day. Or if you are enjoying the benefit of Zoom town halls, being able to watch this recording after the fact to enjoy both the sunny day and learning about this important information coming from the city and regional governments. Tonight, I'll be providing you with an update on what legislation and projects I've been working on so far this year. We'll discuss a little bit of about what's upcoming for the remainder of the year, and we are going to be including a couple panel discussions and presentations from some really great folks here at the city and the Regional Homelessness Authority. So we'll have Dr. Ben Noble presenting tonight from the City Budget Office about who will be giving us the facts of the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funding, how much it is, how we can use it, and what we can expect from these dollars. We, as we'll hear, a part of the ARPA funding will be going to our housing investments. So I've also invited Office of Housing Director Emily Alvarado, who will walk us through the Office of Housing Investments here in District 6 and across the city, what we have to look forward to as far as housing units coming online this year, both through ARPA funding and through existing sources. I'm also honored to host Mark Dones, who is the new CEO chosen for the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. This has been a long-awaited regional authority governance structure. We're excited to have it up and running, and I'm excited to hear the update on how the authority is shaping up and give us insight as to what to expect for the months and years to come. But now on to my updates from this year so far. Communications. I have heard from some folks in the district that you want more communication from me, which is why I have stepped up and prioritized communicating and connecting with you, if not in person, still virtually. We have also set up, in the office, we receive between 200 and 2,000 emails on a given day, depending on what is going on in the city, which is why we have an auto reply function set up that can assist you in having resources that you might be able to use directly. It also links you to our sign-up sheet for district office hours, which I host every week. It also there's a number of different resources, and we also try to get back to you as quickly as possible on email. I send out newsletters about every 2 weeks. These newsletters update folks on information around the community, things that I'm working on, and provide a regular source of interaction between my office and you. One thing that I've noticed is because we send these newsletters out so regularly is that in my own Gmail, the newsletters are going to the promotions tab. So if you've signed up and you don't feel like you've been seeing them lately, check the promotions tab. If you haven't signed up for the newsletter, I strongly suggest and request you do, because there's a lot of really great information in there. I've also started doing monthly questions and answers with my Ballard blog as a way that you can have an unfiltered way to read about what I'm working on and the responses I have to your questions. Also at council briefing every week, it's Monday at 9:30 a.m. Every council member provides an update about what they've been working on and what's coming up for that following week. I've taken an extra step here, and council communications staff has helped me clip these videos, and I post them out to Facebook so that you don't have to go out of your way to know what's going on at City Hall. I don't necessarily know of any other council members clipping and sharing these videos out. Also, if you see them not on a Monday, the information may be a little bit dated by a day or two, just because those briefings happen on Mondays at 9:30. I don't expect you to tune in, but if you would like to, Mondays 9:30 a.m. on Seattle Channel. I've also, most importantly, continued and expanded my District 6 office hours. When I came into office, we started doing this in person at my district office. Due to health guidelines, we moved these virtually, and I'm doing them on video or phone, whatever you choose. There is a separate sign-up sheet so that your request does not get lost in the 200 to 2,000 emails per day. And I meet with 8 or more residents per week. So if you're interested in signing up, there is a link on my website. If you would like to see the past videos of council briefing, we've kept those on my website. Past newsletters are also kept on my website. And we love for you engaging. And so thank you. We also, as part of increased communication with residents, I have regularly scheduled meetings with all of the chambers of commerce, the BIAs, neighborhood councils, and then also micro neighborhood groups that have organized themselves for specific projects. So we have regularly scheduled meetings in addition that keep me connected across the neighborhood. Again, if you'd like to meet with me, please, or view a newsletter or view one of the videos, please go to my website at seattle.gov/council/Strauss. So far this year with resident meetings, I've met with 104 residents one-on-one during these weekly office hours. I've met with folks from Greenwood, Finney Ridge, Ballard, East Ballard, Green Lake, Freelard, Industrial Area, Crown Hill, Upper Fremont, North Ballard, Green Lake, Whittier Heights, Sunset Hill, Lower Finney Ridge, Tangletown, Wallingford, South Green Lake, West Woodland, Loyal Heights, North Beach, Blue Ridge, East Green Lake, Finney Ridge again, Central Ballard, and Finneywood. Why saying all of those micro neighborhoods is important to me is because while if you look at District 6 representing Fremont, Green Lake, Finney Ridge, and Crown Hill and Ballard, those are large swaths of land, and District 6 has micro neighborhoods. So Upper Fremont is so much different than Lower Fremont, and we can go on and on. So I just really love the local vibrancy that we have in our area. In these meetings, I've discussed and provided resources for public safety, homelessness, trees, graffiti and trash removal, safe street closures, Green Lake, stabilizing the Green Lake Community Center, reactivating the Aqua Theater, talking about the need for more childcare providers, creating affordable housing, so much more. This list is too long for me to iterate, and we've got a lot of great information. So you can go back and watch all of my council briefings. Every week I give an update on the area, the micro neighborhood that I've met with, and the issues that they've talked about. As well as helping businesses in our district. There's a really unique and great project that I've been helping to work on and organize. Businesses around the Leary Triangle have been trying for the last 5 or plus years to activate and utilize street space on 9th Avenue Northwest between Leary Way and I believe it's 48th. And so we've been able to organize some momentum, and I'm excited to see the next steps. The ideas so far put forward are having a dog park, a skate park, and food trucks in that area to create a place to meet, eat, and have fun with your neighbors in the area. We're also planning a Ballard Avenue design charrette. You may have seen the Street Cafe program in the works and working. It's just been such a great honor of mine to steward the Street Cafe program through the legislative and department thresholds. Ballard Avenue is a very unique outlier from almost all other streets in the city because Ballard Avenue terminates at the Ballard Bridge and at Market Street. So that means that there's not through traffic. It's also, interestingly, a historic district. And so we have a design charrette coming up next month to look at how can we improve the space in the next year? What are we going to have set in place for the next 4 years? And then what are the things that we want to see there 5 years and beyond? And the reason that that's important is because we need to set guidelines for businesses to meet, and we need to give them a year to meet those guidelines. And then for the next 4 years, we need to make sure that we have a design that we can implement and reimagine our space in downtown Ballard Avenue, whether it's curbless streets or a pedestrian-only area from certain times of the day. There are a lot of opportunities down there, and I'm really excited to get some smart and amazing people, stakeholders from downtown Ballard around a table next month once we open back up a little bit more and have this design charrette to see how we can use our public space, which is the right-of-way down on Ballard Avenue, to create a more vibrant economy and an active place for all residents to be able to enjoy. Legislation this year, and I'm running through these points kind of quickly because we have some really great information coming up from Dr. Ben Noble, Director Alvarado, and CEO Mark Dones. So legislation this year, I've passed important legislation every other month this year. Legislation, the first bill that we passed this year is the most forward-thinking energy code in the nation. We passed it unanimously in February. This legislation prohibits the use of fossil fuels for heating in new multifamily and commercial buildings and will eliminate most carbon emissions from new construction. Why is this important? This is important because the two largest contributors to the climate crisis are transportation and buildings and new construction. And so by passing this forward-thinking, the strongest energy code in the nation, we are going to lead the way at reducing our carbon emissions from the buildings that we used. I also passed Bringing Business Home, a small business flexibility bill, inspired by issues experienced this year by Yonder Cider in District 6. Yonder's experience highlighted for me issues that so many home-based businesses face. So this was not just about Yonder. This applies for anyone that uses their garage to incubate their business. There were very restrictive code elements about signage and other issues. And so this bill, the Bringing Business Home bill, provides a 1-year flexibility on some of these code requirements so that our entrepreneurs can use their garages to build the businesses that will fill the storefronts that might not be filled right now. As we emerge from the pandemic, we need to use this entrepreneurial, and we need to support entrepreneurial spirit to get us moving out of this pandemic. The legislation cut through red tape in our land use code. Specifically, it removed provisions that required businesses operated out of a garage to keep their garage doors closed, which was not appropriate during the pandemic, as we know, for public health reasons. It also allowed for slightly larger signs on these home-based businesses and removed the loopholes that previously you could have as many small signs as you wanted. You could put them close together. And this legislation clarified that you can have one sign and it can be larger. It also eased some language about parking impacts that were often onerous to allow small businesses to get set up. So this bill set forward a 1-year pilot program. And during this time, we've set up a work program to understand what is working well about this legislation, what didn't work well, so that we can pass permanent regulations that actually meet the needs of our residents. Why is this important? This is important because we need to test the things that we talk about so we see how they actually operate in the real world. And pilot programs like this give us an opportunity to dial back or dial forward on our legislation before we make it permanent. Another bill that I recently passed with Council President Lorena Gonzalez is the Cafe Streets legislation. This extends the free sidewalk, curb space, vending, and cafe street permits for free for another year to help businesses recover from the economic recession brought on by COVID-19 pandemic. It also creates a path for permanency for the Cafe Streets program. Much like Bringing Business Home, this legislation requires SDOT to provide me a report by December 15th, 2021, so that when this legislation expires in May of 2022, we have the information we need to make changes going forward that can be permanent. Some interesting things about this legislation is previously sidewalk cafes were permitted and parklets were permitted, but they didn't really quite fit the way that people do business. So there were onerous regulations put on top of them. Allowing this temporary expansion in this way allows us, again, to see what's working well and what's not working well. The permits themselves have been previously based upon the amount of money the parking space in front of their business can generate. So just looking at this, if you have horizontal parking, that would be 1 space. If you have diagonal parking, that could be up to 6 spaces in front of your business. The reason that this permitting cost didn't work correctly is because it's also not taking into account the public benefit that activating our public space does. And it also doesn't take into account the sales tax revenue that these additional seats at these restaurants produce. And so between now and May 2022, we have a plan to right size and create the best regulations that fit the needs of our residents we didn't know that Seattle was a cafe culture before the pandemic, and this is one of those really amazing programs that I'm excited to see move forward, because I think Seattleites around across the city are saying we like eating and shopping outdoors. Um, I've got two more bills that I'll talk about, and then we'll go directly to Dr. Ben Noble. Manufactured home parks is another piece of legislation that I'm currently working on with Councilmember Deborah Juarez. Last month, we introduced the legislation to preserve the last two remaining manufactured home parks in Seattle. The mobile home parks or manufactured home parks provide an affordable place for seniors to age in place while owning their home, even if they don't own the land underneath their homes. Any future redevelopment of these mobile home parks could displace hundreds of seniors and low-income households, and would likely mean more neighbors experiencing homelessness. Unfortunately, our legislation received a legal challenge to its environmental review, so further council action is prohibited until that challenge is resolved. Next week, City Council will be voting on my legislation to extend a moratorium on the redevelopment of mobile home parks until our long-term legislation can be passed. Lastly, this just happened this week. I'm so excited about this. We were able to pass legislation transferring ownership of the Greenwood Senior Center to the Finney Neighborhood Association. It was just yesterday that we passed this legislation that came through my committee to make this transfer. Finney Neighborhood Association has been operating the Greenwood Senior Center already, and giving them ownership will give community greater control over the site. Under these terms, P&A is required to maintain the senior center and the services it provides. And additionally, while there are no current plans to redevelop the site, any future housing development would be required to be affordable, with half of the units affordable to people making 60% of the area median income. I will hold on what I'm going to work on this year. Let's just roll through it, and then we'll get right to you, because I see I'm going to talk about ARPA. Coming this year, I continue to find ways to support small businesses recovering from the pandemic. I'm looking forward to leading the council's consideration on a set of recommendations that were recently made to strengthen protections of our maritime and industrial lands, like Ballard's Working Waterfront, to preserve family wage jobs that those areas create. My committee also just began considering legislation that would allow for land use code flexibility for churches and religious institutions when they build affordable housing. We expect city departments to draft and propose legislation adopting a stronger tree protection ordinance later this year, and I am eagerly awaiting to take that proposal up in my committee. I'm focusing on homelessness in our district, and during last year's budget, I was able to secure 2 additional outreach workers for Northwest Seattle, in addition to all other outreach workers that we have in this area. I do want to highlight that outreach workers are only as successful as the resources that they have available to them. So just having people does not solve our problems. We also need to, and we will hear more from some of our other presenters later this evening, we need to back up our outreach workers with housing, with shelter, with the resources that they need to be successful. Last year, I also increased funding for the mobile crisis team to preserve their team, and added an additional $250,000 to expand for Seattle specifically. And this summer, 3 tiny home villages will open, adding 100 new tiny home village units to serve up to 145 units. There's much more that we need to do, because again, solving for a portion of this crisis does not solve for our crisis. It is important that we are addressing this crisis as the emergency it is. We can't allow people to continue to suffer in our streets. We can't allow our businesses to continue to be broken into, and accumulating the expenses of cleaning and securing their properties. And we can't allow housed neighbors to feel unsafe in their own homes. At the end of the day, we need to solve for the people who are living on our streets by making sure that they have an adequate place to come inside to that meets their needs. We can talk about some of those. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and so we'll get to some of those soon. I just want to say, overarchingly, if there are 4,000 people living outside, then we must provide 4,000 places that meet their needs for them to come inside to. And that means providing a suite of options to fit the needs, because not everyone's needs are the same. We must work together as a region, because this is a regional problem. And I'm excited for the Regional Authority on Homelessness to be up and running, and I'm excited to hear more later. Transitioning now to the American Rescue Plan Act priorities of mine, and then we'll transfer into Director Dr. Ben Noble, who will lead us through a discussion of ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funding. As a brief overview, Seattle is receiving $128 million in federal funding, one-time federal funding, and we will be discussing how to allocate that funding this month. I've been advocating for my funding priorities since May, which allowed the budget chair to include my priorities in negotiations with the mayor. And my priorities for the American Rescue Plan Act funding are, number one, addressing homelessness by buying as much permanent housing as possible so that we don't have to wait for investments to come online and be built. Secondly, providing financial relief to our local businesses through small business stabilization grants and other means. And third, subsidizing childcare and supporting childcare providers. Additionally, I've also supported more funding for rental assistance that allows a landlord to be made whole. If a resident is behind on their rent, they can apply for rental assistance, and that check goes directly to the landlord. So it cancels that resident's debt and it makes the landlord whole. I've also championed funding for reopening our parks and libraries sooner than anticipated, and funding the Street Cafe program that I championed and talked about. Something that's interesting about that Street Cafe, the public space permit team at SDOT is a permit fee generated team. So they've been operating in the red this year. And I've been requesting that some of these ARPA dollars go to backfill some of their great work to make sure that businesses can have free permits while they recover. The mayor, council budget chair, and council president have proposed the Seattle Rescue Plan, which is a compromise plan that they worked together on. And I guess I'm starting to steal some of Dr. Noble's thunder, but overarchingly, it provides $49 million for housing and homelessness, $23 million for community recovery, $7 million for community programming, and 7.6 to support city services like the libraries and parks. I'm heartened by the cooperation between the mayor and the council that this Seattle Rescue Plan represents. I also believe that we should be using even more of this funding to address our homelessness emergency. I've shared this with everyone who will listen to me, and I'm excited to have Dr. Ben Noble here. So as I've mentioned, City Council is going to be having these discussions this Friday, next week, and we'll be passing it later this month. We started the discussions a month ago. Last week, the Seattle Rescue Plan was released, and we will be discussing any amendments to this plan. It's my honor now to welcome Director Dr. Ben Noble of the City Budget Office. Director Noble had moved to Seattle in 1989 after completing a doctorate in economics at the University of Washington. Dr. Noble has pursued a career in public policy and government finance. He's worked for the city for a total of 21 years. Currently, he serves as the city's budget director. He took this role in 2014, and before his current appointment, he directed the Seattle City Council central staff, the staff of nonpartisan policy analysts, and has considerable experience in both the legislative and executive branches of the city government. And he's currently a resident of the district. So with no further ado, Dr. Ben Noble, please join. And we're excited for your presentation. And I think as it moves along, I'll just kind of ask you questions when they come up, but no further ado, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Council Member. I'm going to put up a PowerPoint and walk through at a pretty high clip the proposal that you've described. So this is a proposal from the mayor, Council Member and Budget Chair Mosqueda, and Council President Gonzalez. I'm going to provide some context as well for the overall federal resources that are available. So let me just dive in and do that. Picking this one to be on the screen, and I'm going to go. Folks see that? I'm assuming, yeah, okay, great. So starting at the beginning. So we're calling this Rescue Plan 1 because this is the initial allocation of dollars. There'll be a second tranche, and I'll describe this more coming up, but we're expecting some additional federal money. So the piece of legislation that is before the council now is Plan 1, but there will be a Plan 2 and potentially a Plan 3, if you will. Overall, we expect to get about $300 million from the American Rescue Plan Act, which I will now call ARPA. That's of that 300, about 230 is very flexible coronavirus local fiscal recovery dollars. That's coming in two tranches, 115-ish this year and 115 next year. In addition, there are a number of directed pots of money, very technical term, pot of money, that will benefit the city as well, including, and we'll talk about today, including some money for housing specifically. So in terms of the overall ARPA, almost a $2 trillion relief bill. Just real high clip, wanted to show you how that kind of breaks out. Over here, about 45%, almost 46% is the checks that have been mailed to individuals. So that is the direct individual assistance. The part that is benefiting the city, the county, and other state and local governments is this piece here, the government fiscal relief, about $300 billion, divided up various ways. And then you can see some of the other elements. I just wanted to give you some overall context that the city's 300 million over a couple of years is a share of this overall package, very significant stimulus. These graphs, a lot of information here, but just looking at the height of the bars, wanted to give you a sense of how the city's resources versus the county and the state, which I think is important because a lot of the areas where we're seeking to provide assistance and funding are ones where the county and the state are also working. So we're getting about $300 million, hence the height of this bar. King County is getting somewhat short of $1 billion, but almost $1 billion, and the state got more than $5 billion. And just another thing, again, I don't want to get into too much detail here, but if you look across, and the bars on the right are just exploded versions of the county and the city, so you can sort of see them in better scale. One thing to note here is that the gray in each of these is homelessness and housing funding. So I know an area of interest. I'm not going to drill in further than that just for the sake of time. In terms of the priorities that are reflected in the Seattle plan, were shelter and housing, small business and nonprofit recovery, neighborhood recovery and activation. We'll talk some about that. Direct cash assistance to residents, so on top of what's available from the federal government, community health, education and retraining, and then also making sure that some basic city functions are able to reopen in a timely way. So on homelessness and housing, over $49 million. I'm actually going to shift to the next slide to give you a sense of how that's divvied up. And Emily will be able to talk more about this, and Mark as well, in terms of services being provided. But we have funding for diversion, that's immediate assistance to help folks avoid becoming homeless. Capacity building, the homeless providers have faced significant increased costs operating in the context of COVID, so this is some financial assistance to them. We are also working to expand shelter opportunities, so there's $7.5 million for enhanced shelter and for outreach. That includes some options around hotel rooms on a temporary basis. One of the more significant investments.
Dr. Noble,
yeah.
Can I just editorialize just a little bit to explain a little bit more background for people viewing right now? Enhanced shelter is different than congregate shelter. Congregate shelter means mats on the floor without separation between people. Enhanced shelter provides folks a meaningful place to keep their things, have their partners, and be able to come and go 24/7. So that's a really important investment. Thanks, Dr. Noble.
No, and just to build on that, enhanced shelter also includes some level of service to help. The goal is not just to provide people a place to sleep, but to find them a permanent place to be, and the enhanced shelter offers some of those services as well. One of the more significant items in terms of shelter space is actually this next one. It says increase RRH. RRH is rapid rehousing. And again, it's investments to try to take people who are in the shelters and move them through quickly. One of the best ways we have to create capacity in our shelter system is to make the system that we have work harder. So to get people, shelter is obviously essential for the moment that you are there, but the ultimate goal is to find a permanent housing solution. And these dollars are designed to move folks who are in the position to do that quickly into housing. So it's actually a way to increase the capacity of our shelter system without building more units. Next item, which was a oddly precise allocation of $28,520,000. That has to do with the fact that that is a combination of the relief dollars, the pooled relief dollars, and then also the specific, there's a federal program called HOME. Again, Emily Alvarado, Director of Office of Housing, can tell you more, that we're getting a share of. But this is going to be directed towards permanent housing for low-income folks. And then some small amounts of money for safe lots and operation of tiny home villages as well.
This is really helpful, Dr. Noel. $49 million. That's about half, maybe a little less than half of our total first tranche. Is that correct?
Yeah, the total allocation here, because we're including the home dollars, is closer to 150. So it's about a third, but it's obviously a very substantial share.
And I really appreciate you calling out the rapid rehousing. It's something that I've noticed as I've been intent on trying to address homelessness in our district, is that we have 2,500 shelter beds existing currently right now in the city of Seattle. And on any given night, I look at the tracker every night, and at most I've seen 10 or 15 shelter beds open on a given night. And a lot of people get stuck there in the shelter. And so that rapid rehousing is just very critical. It creates more places for people to come inside to and permanent housing options. Thank you, Dr. Noble.
Of course. Community well-being, again, this is primarily focused around direct cash assistance, but then also you'll see, and I'll get to some detail here, also support for childcare and also some education components. So total just over $40 million. We're targeting $25 million for direct cash assistance. You might ask why in the context of the federal stimulus and the checks that have been available. One of the key segments or demographic groups that we are targeting are immigrant and refugees. We did that with our first federal dollars, which we got last year. They in general are not eligible for the federal stimulus checks, but obviously that's a community that is essential to Seattle and is an important share of our residents. So this is a way for us to provide assistance to those who potentially need it most. I'm not going to hit all these items, just a couple of them. Education equity programs, that's $4 million. Recently, the city, through a levy, expanded its role in community college, providing tuition for graduating seniors to attend community college. This is some dollars that are targeting both the cohort of students who are in the community colleges as COVID hit, and those who are juniors and seniors and who are headed that direction. Obviously been a very challenging time to be a student, challenging time to make the transition, in particular from high school to college. So a variety of programs here to try to support those students who've had that difficult time. Another significant component here, next two items, childcare facilities and childcare stipend. That's $8 million in total for childcare facilities and operators. So on the capital side for facilities, we need to stand up more. We have lost childcare providers over the course of COVID to get folks are trying to get back to work, need that help, need that coverage. And then the stipend is to help operators and childcare workers receive some additional compensation given the challenges they have faced and the increased cost of operations and the like. So those are really very, very significant components of our efforts on community well-being.
Oh, this is extremely helpful. You've already hit two of my top three priorities. And it's been great to work with you over the last month plus, making sure. And so this is just a demonstration of one of my priorities is getting half of the ARPA funding. The second priority, childcare facilities and stipends. I'm very aware that so many people in our community before the pandemic were having to drive out of the city to get childcare. And now that the pandemic has happened, there are many child care providers that just were not able to thrive or survive. And so this program here sets us up to reopen those slots quickly and adequately. So thank you very much, Dr. Noble. This is an important investment.
Yeah, no, it's a priority for all the city's elected officials. Community recovery, this is really about business and neighborhoods, not just individual businesses, but groups of businesses and the communities, the residents who rely on those businesses. Let me talk a little bit more about the specifics. So it's a total of about 23 million, some money for apprenticeships and youth employment, then a total of $22 million to be divided into recovery grants for neighborhoods and business areas, including downtown. Downtown is, from a city revenue perspective, an important source of revenue, having folks downtown during the day, shopping, eating lunch, all those sorts of things. So downtown recovery is really not just about downtown businesses, it's about all of us. We need that really to take off, but obviously neighborhoods as well. So we're looking at grants that would go to individual businesses, but also grants that would go to business improvement areas or to other forms of business groups. And another piece of this would be technical assistance. So there's a fair amount of money available at the state and federal level for small business. So we want to make sure that we're able to leverage that by providing the assistance, and our Office of Economic Development would do that and has done that for individual businesses to apply for those resources. So again, a significant share of the overall pie here.
And can you remind me, last year, the city was the only entity providing these small business stabilization grants. We didn't have that from the state, and the feds had their paycheck protection program. But
right. So we did a combination of things. So for paycheck protection, we were helping people apply, and then we also had some cash resources that we were distributing to folks who might not otherwise be eligible, particularly targeting really small scale businesses as well. Another key component is actually this is enhancing the services or stepping up with the services that the city provides. So we did not budget anticipating that we would be open quite as soon as we are opening, which is a great thing. But unfortunately, we have resources from the federal government to help us step up and turn things on, if you will, a little sooner. So resources for the Parks Department to do enhanced cleaning and programming. The funding to turn the Stay Healthy streets into permanent fixtures. So those opportunities to go walk and exercise on limited access, well, what's become limited access roads, that those would be made permanent. So a variety of pieces there. Also money for the libraries to open up more than they had otherwise been budgeted for. So some critical pieces there. And then supporting city services and workers, it is, and anyone who's been working, it's been a challenge and expensive to keep the city and all of its workforce operating under COVID conditions, if you will. And so these are some resources to help keep all of us connected electronically. So it's really the backbone of the city. We have about 4,000 employees working remotely, myself and my team among them. But we also have 6,000 people who are coming to work, by the way. That includes all of our firefighters and all of our police officers, dedicated folks at Seattle Public Utilities, keeping the water running, and at City Light, keeping the electricity on, and in various other places, SDOT. So, basic city operations have proven to be more expensive as well. So some resource to help support the city's operations.
Something that I just want to highlight, your steady hand on the tiller this last year, Dr. Noble. You were able to give us some of the most accurate budget projections. We were more accurate than the state, I guess I should say. Your past history working on central staff throughout the city and at the CBO's office, you really provided us the best information that we could use to get through the pandemic. And this slide really highlights that in an important way, which is that you were able to turn the dials appropriately to understand when we were going to reopen. Now that we're reopening sooner than we anticipated, we were able to use those dollars that earlier to provide meaningful and important resources and services to our city. And now that we're reopening sooner, we're going to be using these federal dollars to backfill that. So just have to thank you, because you had a steady hand as we navigated uncharted waters. And then lastly, on the last bullet point here, preparing city buildings for safely reopening, I just want to highlight here that it's not just city employees going into these buildings. Buildings like the Seattle Municipal Tower downtown or the community service centers across the city operate permit counters and walk-up places for whether it's builders or just getting your small business registration approved, City Light, SDOT, there are so many places that people need to physically come into. And so we need to make sure that our buildings have been cleaned and are safe for the public and our workers to come back to. So again, just thanks for your steady hand this last year. It paid off.
Very much appreciated. The thing folks need to know is that there's a whole team of folks behind me. I get to be the figurehead here, but it is a lot of folks dedicated work. Again, more than 10,000 city employees who have helped us all get through this. So, but much appreciated. Thank you. Just in terms of timeline, as Councilmember Strauss has described, the City Council takes this up for discussion on Friday, anticipating some further discussion the week following, target of a vote on the 15th or the 16th out of the committee, and then goes to full council after that. But our goal is to move this quickly and to get resources out into the community and on the table. And actually, there's some places where even now, given the level of agreement that we've seen between the mayor and the council, that we've given department heads the go ahead to move forward because we fully anticipate that there'll be resources provided. So on a fast plan here, and then the rescue plan 2, we're waiting for some additional direction from the federal government. That one is about there's some dollars that are dedicated, for instance, to, well, there's some dedicated to childcare. There's some specific some to transportation. So once our city's allocation of those becomes more clear, we will come back with additional proposal. And the budget for 2022, which my team is now working on, will include proposals for the allocation of the second tranche of about 115. So as the council takes up the budget in the fall, that'll be a piece of that work. So that's where we are at the moment. And it's been a great partnership between the council and mayor to date, and look forward to that going forward.
Well, it also takes somebody with a steady hand. So again, thank you, Dr. Noble, for all of your work. For viewing public here, Dr. Noble just went over a lot of information rather quickly, and his presentations to the Finance and Housing Committee go more in depth with more council members asking questions. You can view those committee meetings and learn more about the Seattle Rescue Plan and the American Rescue Plan Act by going to seattlechannel.org and looking up the Finance and Housing Committee briefings. With that, I guess I just, again, want to thank you, Director Noble, for your time this evening and service to the residents of Seattle. And we'll move on to our next conversation, which is about housing. We have Director Alvarado. Director Emily Alvarado is the Director of Office of Housing. Previously, she was the Manager for Policy and Equitable Development, leading the Office of Housing Strategic Initiative, Place-Based Development, and Incentive Programs. She's served in leadership positions at several nonprofit organizations, advancing housing and economic development solutions to create thriving, just communities. She serves on the board of the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance, a graduate of Scripps College and the University of Washington School of Law. She lives in West Seattle with her family. She'll be walking us through District 6 Office of Housing Investments and citywide investments, and what we can look forward to here in the city and the district at large when it comes to housing investments, specifically using the aforementioned ARPA funds, since it's half of the ARPA funds are going to address homelessness, and a large portion of that is going to the Office of Housing. Director Alvarado, please take it away, and we will continue the conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Councilmember Strauss, and hello, District 6. I'm Emily Alvarado. I'm your partner in the city's Office of Housing, and I love to partner with community to really create affordable housing in District 6 and around the city. Because we are still in a time where a significant number of families and individuals are struggling, I really wanted to start by saying that the city's been fortunate to allocate already $23 million from the federal government in rent assistance. And so if you need rent assistance help, you can go to the United Way's website, uwkc.org/rent-help. And I'll make sure that Councilmember Strauss can also share that information, where you can sign up to get rental assistance. And also, we know that there are many homeowners who are struggling also. So if you're having a hard time making your mortgage payments, or if you need someone to talk to about what are your options on loan modifications and other strategies, we invest our housing levy resources to help prevent foreclosure for our neighbors. So if you need support, please go to homeownership/wa.org. That's the Washington State Homeownership Resource Center that we invest in to help support Seattle homeowners. So all of that really deserved a slide and a visual, and I'm sorry I didn't bring that, but we'll follow up with information because we're trying to get resources out to you all.
And Director Alvarado, we'll put that in our newsletter this week. So that's a nod to District 6 residents who haven't signed up already. If you need those links, they'll be in the newsletter this week.
Thank you. So what most people know about us at the Office of Housing is that we're the stewards of your Seattle housing levy. And because of that significant investment in resources and the predictability of that as a fund source, we're able to make a difference in investing in affordable housing. And just to give a sense of scale, people don't know this, but there are 14,400 affordable units that have been funded by the Office of Housing that are open and providing safe, affordable homes for residents right now. And just to give a sense of scale, in the last few years, we've been making rapid investments because we know that housing is the solution to homelessness. We know that housing is essential for our communities. So we have 4,600 apartments under construction right now, with over 3,000 coming online in the next year. So there are homes out there that are affordable, and we need to continue to grow our investments. And really, I just want to say a few things, which is because I'm passionate about housing. And when we make these investments, we're doing several things. One, housing's critical infrastructure. And we've seen it during this pandemic really clearly that people need a place to live. And when we invest in affordable housing, we create that critical infrastructure for low and moderate income households. We know that this is a key part of our efforts to advance racial equity and affirmatively further fair housing, which is our obligation under federal law. And we also know that when we make investments in housing, like some that I'll talk about later, we're able to really bake community wellness into our investments. So many of the buildings that we support might have affordable housing on top and might have a childcare on the ground floor or other community serving spaces. And we look forward to partnering with folks in D6 to bring more of those homes online. So what has that meant for D6, all of those numbers? Just want to give a couple of examples. In 2019, I was really proud that we were able to take 2 parcels of publicly owned land, utility property that was unused, and we're able to create permanently affordable homeownership opportunities on those properties. So one at Loyal Heights, we have Loyal Heights townhomes opening soon. These are 7 homes. Just to give a sense of scale, these are 3-bedroom townhomes that will be sold to households making $90,000 for a family of 4 or below, and the homes will be priced in the range of $200,000. So these are deeply affordable homeownership opportunities. Also at Finney Ridge, yep, go ahead.
Director Alvarado, I just kind of want to jump in there to say
Yeah.
that it is incredible. I think we just need to sit on this for a minute. Back in my day growing up, homes did not cost $200,000 in Ballard. Now, today, a home that you just described would go between $6.5 to $900,000. And we are providing a pathway to permanent home ownership, which is equity, which is generational wealth in our neighborhood. So for a lot of District 6 residents, I've heard, well, things have changed so much. People that I grew, and for me, people that I grew up with can't afford to live in the neighborhood. And this provides that pathway for the people that I grew up with in the neighborhood to be able to come home. So just thank you.
Yeah, and it's really about creating a range of housing options at different scale for people of different family size and household size, and for people at different incomes. We were also able to support affordable homeownership condominiums at Finney Ridge. There are going to be 19 homes there. Also a mix of affordable and market rate homes, both through city investment. More recently, in 2020, we made 2 really significant investments in District 6 as part of our permanent supportive housing pilot. And Councilmember Strauss mentioned why pilots are beneficial, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're learning already from this pilot. But what we did is we sought to double a single year's production of permanent supportive housing in order to see if we can expedite the product that we know is the evidence-based solution to homelessness. We know it works, so can we do more? And we were able to invest in 600 units of permanent supportive housing. 2 projects are located in District 6, one Greenwood PSH, and then the other Ballard Crossing. Greenwood will provide 66 units to people who are experiencing homelessness. Ballard Crossing will provide about 80 units for folks experiencing homelessness. And in both of these locations, we are providing the solution to homelessness, doing it in a way that's responsive to neighborhood context. We know where these buildings are located. We're thinking about how we support homeless folks who will make that home. In both of these buildings, there are case managers and supportive services located on site to support the residents and make sure that the residents are part of the broader community. And through those, yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Director Alvarado, just to kind of focus on the fact that we know permanent supportive housing addresses the people who are chronically homeless. Just for everyone's viewing pleasure, the operating costs of permanent supportive housing, they equate to, you can spend the same amount of money to keep somebody in jail for 3 months, or at Harborview Hospital for 3 days, or for a full year in permanent supportive housing. I've also heard from some neighbors about concerns that they have with the location of these sites. And what I can tell you is I was on the phone today with public libraries in Greenwood. We know, they have a great relationship with the Executive Pacific Hotel that is operating as a homeless shelter right now. The key to success here is communication and ensuring that we are mitigating for anything that is not working well. Again, having people living on site means that there are more people attentive to any problematic issues that are occurring, and having these sites located with the services and these personnel means that there are more people looking after our neighborhood than we have looking after our neighborhood today. Just wanted to jump in there, Director Alvarado, if you want to.
Absolutely, and I'd also say that the other thing that we do is we invest in homeless housing providers who have a track record of success. And so at Greenwood will be operated and owned by Catholic Community Services, Catholic Housing Services, who has been doing this work across the state, across the country for many years, and knows what it takes to provide services to support their residents. They also know what it takes to create meaningful connections with community. And at Greenwood, for example, we know Catholic Housing Services is already providing and creating partnerships with a lot of faith communities across District 6 to build connections between residents who are already housed and residents who will become housed. Also in Ballard, that building will be owned and operated by Plymouth Housing Group, has a focused mission and track record at supporting people who are experiencing homelessness. And so they already know what kinds of interventions are necessary. And if anything were to arise, they have the tools to both support the people and make sure that there aren't disruptions in the neighborhood.
That's really helpful. And also just my office has been keeping a keen eye to these programs. And so we'll continue engaging. One question that I have, and this is maybe shifting gears just a little bit, we just heard from Dr. Noble about all of the Seattle Rescue Plan, how a large portion of those funds are going to be coming to Office of Housing so that we are able to move quickly. It's been my desire for us to be able to purchase buildings that already exist so that we don't have to wait for them to be built. Can you give me a little bit of an overview on how we're going to be using those Seattle Rescue Plan dollars and how quickly some of those units might come online?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you mentioned, the key is quick. And I think we all know that housing is the evidence-based solution to homelessness, but it also takes a long time for housing to come from an idea to a building in which a person lives in it. And so through our PSH pilot, we were really pushing on the concept of whether we can deliver homes in record time. And I think we proved from that pilot that it's possible in both of the locations that I mentioned in D6. These were projects that were sites that were already entitled, which means they were already moving through the permitting process. And so at Greenwood, we will have people living in the building in less than 18 months from our funding award. That's rapid. We've now taken that and learned even more. Not too long ago, we were able to make an investment with Lehigh to secure a multifamily building that was currently under construction. And 4 months after we started making the investment, we moved 70 some odd folks into that building, exiting tiny home villages and encampments and some of the hotels that exist today. So we know that we can do the same thing through this 20, with a lot of dots after it, roughly $25 million from the American Rescue Plan. We're able to purchase buildings that are multifamily apartment buildings that are currently under construction. We're able to take advantage of really what is a unique condition in our real estate market right now, and to partner with buildings that are currently under development to secure them and convert them into permanent affordable homes through partnership with our trusted community-based providers. So we are out there, we're talking to providers, we're talking to folks, and we see significant opportunity to really scale that solution and bring roughly 300 units online in record time to help support our unhoused neighbors.
That is good news. And if I can find you more money in that package, I will absolutely be pushing it your way, because we need to be able to bring these housing units online. For people viewing this transparently, that means that I would have to cut another part of the agreed upon plan. So Dr. Ben Noble's not with us anymore. Otherwise, he would be really not desiring me to cut funding from one place and add it to another. I have not identified what cuts would have to occur. I just know that by providing you the funding you need to get these units built as quickly as possible is important. Can you briefly also touch on mandatory housing affordability dollars and levy dollars and how those are being used? And then I know Mark Dones is eagerly awaiting to come and talk to us about homelessness, but just kind of high level overview. You talked about the levy, but also maybe mandatory housing affordability dollars.
Absolutely. So on an annual basis, we pool resources from the housing levy and the payments that come from mandatory housing affordability. And what we typically do is we put out those resources as part of a single year competitive notice of funds availability process, where we ask community partners to come in and we provide financing to invest in affordable housing across the city. Last year, we did something different. Instead of having one NOFA, we heard from folks like you, Councilmember Strauss, that we want housing faster than ever. So we put out 3 NOFAs, a spring one for the permanent supportive housing pilot, and one in the fall, where we're making investments.
NOFA stands for
Notice of Funds Availability. Sorry for my acronyms. And we have a sense that there are projects across the city right now that are already indicating to us that they're interested in securing funding to become affordable housing. I should also mention that, mandatory housing affordability is something that is in effect now. And we're seeing the affordable housing outcomes, one, by getting payments, but also there are projects in District 6 that have chosen to do on-site performance and include affordable units within their buildings. So there's a project in Fremont that has 3 affordable units included. We know that there's one in Green Lake that also chose performance. And we also know, on top of that, I should just mention that we have our incentive, our MFTE, multifamily tax exemption program. So it is the case that in some of the market rate development that is coming up across the city, that there are some buildings in which there are affordable units in those buildings as well. In fact, 29 of the buildings that are market rate buildings in District 6 have affordable units included in them from the MFTE program. So we'll continue to leverage all of those programs to make sure that we can create more lasting affordable homes. And again, I seek to be a partner with communities. So if you have ideas, if you have questions, always feel free to reach out to your Office of Housing.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Director Alvarado. Last kind of question here before you go, just for the viewing audience's information, can you help me understand the difference between the Office of Housing and Seattle Housing Authority? And by way of that, answering the question, does the Office of Housing operate housing itself, or do other organizations operate that housing? And I come from a number of the apartments I lived in Ballard have Seattle Housing Authority buildings next to them. They are nondescript. They look like every other house in the neighborhood, and are a way to provide affordable housing. So could you
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we are not the Seattle Housing Authority. The Seattle Housing Authority is actually an entity that's derived from the federal government. And so they wholly receive federal resources like Section 8 housing choice vouchers or public housing funds to create affordable housing. The Seattle Housing Authority owns and operates the housing themselves. At the Office of Housing, we are more of a funder, a partner, a policymaker, and a convener. And so what we do is invest in mostly nonprofit organizations who have their own projects, often created based on community vision. These partners include Bellwether Housing, Plymouth and Catholic Housing Services, as I mentioned before, Habitat for Humanity, Homestead Community Land Trust, and others. And we invest in them and we secure that affordability by doing monitoring and making sure that your dollars go to work in these buildings for at least 50 years to create affordable housing for the long term.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you, Director Alvarado, for all of your time this evening and your leadership at the Office of Housing, as well as your service to our residents. For folks viewing right now, we will be sending out the resources that Director Alvarado mentioned in our newsletter later this week. And please never hesitate to reach out to us if there are things that we can help about to assist in connecting with the Office of Housing. They're doing great work in our city. So thank you again, Director Alvarado.
Thank you so much.
And up next, we have Mark Dones. He is our new Chief Executive Officer, or they are our new Chief Executive Officer, my apologies, Mark, of the King County Regional Authority on Homelessness Authority. Mark Dones is a social entrepreneur, a policy strategist with over 10 years of experience in equitable systems and transformation across local, state, and federal governments. Prior to taking on the role of inaugural Chief Executive Officer for the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, Mark was the founder and executive director of the National Innovation Service, a systems transformation consulting firm that partnered with governments across the country to redesign their approaches to supporting marginalized populations. Prior to launching National Innovation Service, Mark held various roles in social impact, specializing in policy, program design, and continuous improvement. That's the most important part, continuous improvement. This includes leadership roles at Future Laboratories and the Center for Social Innovation. Outside of direct systems transformation, Mark is a faculty member at the School of Visual Arts and leverages their experience as a keynote speaker and panelist. Mark holds a degree from NYU in psychiatric anthropology and is a highly qualified equity trainer. I am, for everyone, and I'm going to ask Mark a whole bunch of questions in this regard, I am just so happy and excited to have them here today because they helped us get the Regional Authority on Homelessness off the ground. It required passing legislation at both the county and the city level. And it was not an easy task. So Mark, welcome, take it away.
Thank you, Council Member. Happy to be here with you all today, and glad to get a chance to preview what we're doing at the Authority and where we're headed. I will take a little bit of what the Council Member just offered as an entryway to remind everyone sort of what it took to get here and where we are. So in 2018, I actually started working with the city and the county on what became the design for the Regional Authority. Continued that work, working with community members across the region to really sculpt the authority, and then ultimately passed legislation in 2019. I think what's important to note is that the legislation was passed in December of 2019. The expectation at that time was that there would be a CEO who would not be me, and that they would start their job in like February-ish of 2020. And we all know what happened for the remainder of 2020.
And Mark, I just want to you just made it sound so simple to pass legislation at both the city and county level. You breezed across that. And why this is important for us to all understand is that you were running across the street between the King County Courthouse, where the King County Council meets, and Seattle City Hall, where the Seattle City Council meets. You had to make sure that the county executive was on the same page as the mayor, and that all of the county council members who stretch as far as North Bend to Covington to Duval to downtown Seattle and Vashon were all on the same page. Just before we get into where we're going, can you give some brief remarks about that process?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Dr. Noble said, I will echo, right? It wasn't just me, it was a whole team of people. But it is complicated to make sure that many stakeholders are in alignment throughout the creation and passing of legislation. I think that what's important for folks to know is that throughout that, what we used as our sort of North Star and how we really were able to get that much buy-in is that we worked really extensively with community members with a focus on frontline staff at provider agencies and people experiencing homelessness to understand what it is that the authority should do, how its fundamental first principles should be designed, and to some degree, who and what it should be accountable to. I think the most complicated part, and I think you remember some of these conversations, Councilmember, was articulating what the governance structure was going to be. And that I think was, again, where we really talk about accountability and the accountability of my role in stewarding, over $100 million in public funding towards ending homelessness in the region. And so I have a little bit of a complex governing structure, but I think that it does reflect ultimately what I hope will be the promise that we all live into, which is that the authority represents our opportunity to do something together as a community differently, right? But that the only way we actually get to that place of doing something differently is if we do it together. And I think that is, to me, I quote this quite often, but I had the opportunity to work in Massachusetts in the Deval Patrick administration. And one of the things Governor Patrick used to say all the time is government is only what we agree to do together. And I think that's just a really important thing to remember, that like all of this, right? Like all of this entire country, just a bunch of stuff we're agreeing to do together. And that the really extraordinary things that we've accomplished as a country, as communities, have always been more about us than a single individual or a small group. And so I am grateful for this opportunity to speak with the residents of District 6, because I want to be clear that in my vision of how the authority operates, you are part of that us, right? Like you are the we. And so if it isn't all of us collectively saying there are some real fundamentals in our community right now that are unacceptable, and so as a result, we have to do things differently to get to the reality we all want to live in, that's how you pass major legislation. That's how you end homelessness. And that's the work that we have in front of us.
And what you said right there was incredibly spot on, and you gave credit where credit's due, but government is what we agree to do together. Can you speak a little bit about the importance of this regional authority? Because Seattle was doing things, the county were doing things, we weren't necessarily doing them together. And then we had bureaucracy on top of each other, implementing overlapping programs that weren't communicating with each other. Can you talk a little bit about that and where we're going with it?
Yeah, the previous system had some real fundamental fragmentation, and there were programs aimed at supporting people experiencing homelessness spread primarily across 3 different divisions of government between the county, the city, and an agency called All Home, which some folks might be familiar with. But the bottom line is that all of these agencies held different pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, and the coordination between them was such that it wasn't actually possible for, frankly, clear decision-making and strategy design and then execution on that strategy, right? And so when I was helping to lead some of the work that crafted the regional authority, we cited, I believe, 4 other reports, including a report from the King County Auditor that all said the same thing. Like, this is too fragmented to expect results out of. And one of the key differences between previous approaches and the authority, just at a structural level, is that because we will have the span of control over the dollars that are supporting folks experiencing homelessness that were coming from the county and coming from the city, that will allow us to be, frankly, more accountable and to be able to say to you as citizens, this is what a dollar does. Yes. This is what a dollar doesn't do. And you have my absolute commitment that I am never going to tell you that a dollar is going to do more or less than what it will do. But that you will always get an answer to that question, right? Because I believe that the folks who live in our community and in all of our districts, right, are justifiably concerned with what they have understood as increasing expenditure and like a lack of clarity around what they can expect from that expenditure, right? Which is the fun, like those are the basics of public administration, right? You should be able to say what you're doing.
And
management.
And I think one thing that you were teasing out there that I might put a more crystal clear focus on is that when we have these different levels of government all operating without communicating, we have mismanagement occurring. And that was one of the central reasons that we needed to create this regional authority, so that we have proper management of the crisis before us. You spoke about working in Massachusetts and Boston. While they have a right to housing law that makes some things a little bit different than there are here in Seattle, they also have a fair amount of intensive management of the crisis that they had.
Yeah. And I think that, I agree. And I think that the thing that I would elevate is that the mismanagement that comes from fragmentation isn't malicious. It isn't that any one individual or group of individuals are trying to do the wrong thing. It's just a fundamental difficulty coordinating. And so some of, I think, what we experienced as Seattle process, right, in reality was fragmentation. And it was a lack of clarity around who got to make the decision. And so as a result, it was possible for plans to circulate in a way that didn't have a clear resolution process, didn't have a clear way of saying, okay, like it's been signed off here, and so it's going into action, and here are the results and accountabilities we expect from it. So I do think that there is a way that what we do will be fundamentally different in that space. And again, I am aiming to structure the agency in such a way that we can always be transparent, that we can always be accountable. But I've said this to folks already, and I want to be clear here. As the both previous directors indicated, right? We have some real fundamentals in our housing market that we're going to have to be solving for. And the true cost of some of that stuff is still unknown to us. But what we will be able to do, and I think this is really important, is in the near term, begin to identify what the delta is between the money that is in the system, what it is accomplishing, and what we actually need. And again, to the basic point of what does a dollar do, what people can expect from us at what levels of spending.
And something right there that's really important is that as a regional authority, you are able to take city, county, state, federal funds and direct them into one place, rather than each of those separate levels of government attempting to do the best with their dollar.
Yeah, and my hope is that this also dramatically simplifies things for a lot of our provider agencies who do incredible work, but have previously had to manage multiple contracts with multiple different, county and city actors. And now much of that contracting will be consolidated into the authority. And so it'll be one single point of contact, which will allow them to really focus on the good work that they do and not on, 1,000 different contract managers. I think that, to that point, one of the things that I want to let folks know is where we are right now. So I've been on the job for I'm 5.5 weeks in. And so
a month plus 1 week.
Yes. And so the problem is solved, and I'm actually retired. No.
Just before we get into this, you left us off before I interrupted you, you left us on a timeline of the CEO was supposed to be hired February 2020.
Yes.
As we know, the world came crashing down around us to address the public health crisis of a pandemic. Can you take us on the timeline from there to get us to where we are today and where we're going?
Yes. So we were headed in the same place. So I've been on the job for 5.5 weeks, right? theoretically, a person was supposed to have been in this job now for about a year and a half. And I just think it's really important for folks to understand that, because of the significant and justifiable, again, like no one was being irresponsible, the world came crashing down. And so as a result, the people who were managing the process that led to ultimately my appointment, right, like redirected those efforts into, we have to make sure that people are safe inside a global pandemic. And so that process became deprioritized. And then as we started to see relief from some of the worst of the pandemic, and we started to see, you know, the sort of twinkling on the horizon of vaccine rollout, it was brought back to the fore, ultimately resulting in my confirmation was, I believe, mid-March, and I had to cycle out of the job I was in, and so I started towards the end of April, and here we are,
On
right?
June 2nd. Because this is a recorded viewing that you may be viewing some other day. Mark came on late April, and we are June 2nd.
Yeah.
And you're moving quickly already.
Thank you. But I think it is important for folks to have that timeline in their heads. And so thank you for giving me the opportunity to unroll it for folks, because I do want people to have expectations of us, but I also am asking for a little bit of grace as we catch up from being, you know, blown off course for a year. With that in mind, the work that we're currently moving forward on is turning the lights on. So staffing up, making sure that we have fiscal processes in place that are strong, that are robust, that we can steward public funds appropriately, making sure that we are designing the policies that are required of us by legislative action in a way that is thoughtful. Some of those things I'm really proud of. We are required to have an equity-based decision-making framework that guides how we make our investments, how we make our policy decisions, always with communities most impacted at the core of that decision-making, right? We are explicitly tasked with addressing the disproportionalities in the population we see experiencing homelessness, which, despite the general population, we see as disproportionately Black folks and disproportionately Native folks. So there's a lot of good work that we're required to do by legislation, and we're in the process of beginning to do that. We're also, to the point that you made about regionalization, we are regional. Seattle is not the only jurisdiction that we are needing to account for in a really granular way. And so we're in the process of, we've already started our sub-regional planning work, where we're looking at South King County, East King County, North King County, Seattle Metro, and saying, what are the needs in each of these locations? And how do we understand them at more than a surface level? And for us, that is about talking with residents. But I want to be clear when we say residents, housed and unhoused, right? We need to understand what the needs of people experiencing homelessness are. And frankly, particularly the needs of people experiencing homelessness who are not connected to services currently, right? I know that there is a lot of concern about the rise in folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness, concern that I share. And the best way to address that rapidly is to understand what those folks need and start providing it. And so that's really going to be the focus of our work in the next several months, is identifying those needs and then rapidly looking to identify and scale solutions, so that as early, frankly, as winter, we can start moving people into housing situations that make sense for them.
That's really helpful, and I appreciate that framework. Last two questions here. Can you help me understand your timeline for the remainder of the year of merging Seattle and King County processes and people? And it's my understanding that these timelines are not your decision. These are legislatively laid out. Can you just speak to that and give us a timeline for the rest of this year?
Yeah, so the legislative requirements have to do with when I present a staffing plan for approval, when we present sub-regional planning, and those are the gating mechanisms between us and some of the other work that we want to do. So The staffing plan will go before the governing bodies in July, mid-July. Immediately after that approval, we can post to hire the remainder of the positions that I'm looking to hire. We're hiring for about 10 people right now. Ultimately, we'll be an agency of about 40-ish people. And as we start to hire people in August-ish, by September, we will start transferring contracts from the city and the county over to the authority. And the goal that we have set is that all contracts being transferred from the city and the vast majority from the county by December 31st. So that when we get to January 1, we are a fully operant agency and we have the span of control over the funding that we need to have. I think one other thing related to that I would want your constituents to know is that while we're doing all this turning on the lights, we're not just turning on the lights because we're in a crisis. And I want people to hear me clearly when I say that I understand that. And so it's not sufficient to say we're doing operations for the next 6 months, we'll get back to you. So a significant component of what I'm also looking to identify through our sub-regional planning work are what are the opportunities for catalytic investment that could make real significant change real quickly. And I'm very concerned, particularly in that space, about people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. I think that it's really important that everyone, again, hear from me directly when I say it is simply unacceptable that people have to live outside. That simply cannot be true. And so, I want to be really clear because, there are misconceptions about me, that, I am not pro sweeps. I've been very clear about that for 10 years. That's not changing. But when I say that I'm not pro sweeps, that doesn't mean I think that people should live outside. Like, these are not binary options, right? Like, what we need to be doing is focusing on the near term. And you heard Emily, right, say this, that like there are in front of us ways that we can rapidly accelerate the availability of housing for people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness right now. And I think that I'm fortunate to be in dialogue and partnership with the city and the county, because I think all of the relevant directors, myself included, are aligned on this is an untenable situation and we need to focus on ramping up housing options and not sort of moving people around without a clear direction, right? And so I want people to hear that really, really explicitly from me as a policy commitment on behalf of my agency, but also gratitude for our partners who are aligned in that same space.
That's really helpful. And I just want to put another finer focus on what you said there, which is that you've been on the job for 5 weeks. Within the next 3 months, you'll have about a quarter of your staff and contracts coming over from the city and county in the next 3 months. And then in 6 months from now, you will have all of the contracts from both the county and the city. And so this timeline is literally half the time that has elapsed between when the CEO was supposed to be hired in February 2020 and today. So in half of that amount of time, your operation is going to be moving. I can hear the urgency in your voice, and I just can't thank you enough. Last question for you, toughest one. What do I need to be doing? What do I need to be focusing on? What do you need from me, the city council, the city of Seattle at large, for you to be successful this year?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. I think we will need help on resources, and that's just I think you and I both know that like there's a need here that is greater than what we're currently spending, and we're going to have to figure out what that delta is. And the other thing that I think we need to really be focused on, and I appreciate the work that you're clearly doing to connect with your constituents and to keep them informed, because I think that's the other thing we need to really be doing, right? Like, I would love, when we're able to again, to do some door knocking with you, to like sit and talk with people about what's happening with regard to homelessness in the city, because I think that it's really important that as we begin this work, that we really bring folks along, and that those folks not just be people who are in seats, right? But that they are our neighbors, that they are, that we're doing the backyard talks, the living room talks, whatever, the walks around the block, whatever they need to be, so that we're helping people to understand that, again, this is not a question of what, Councilmember Strauss and CEO Jones are going to do. This is like Mark, Dan, and everybody else. And that actually is the truth of it. And so that, I think, is the thing that I would ask most, is like, let's really bring people along on this journey, and let's do it together.
Thank you, CEO Mark Dones of the Regional Homelessness Authority here, Seattle King County. We are lucky to have you. Your ability to just get legislation across the table between a county executive, a city mayor, county council, and a city council in short order. We have high expectations that I think are reasonable of you, because we've already seen you work. So for the viewing public, Mark Dones has offered elected officials a monthly briefing on status updates. And I want to demonstrate that, because he is being accountable to the people that he is serving. They are serving. My apologies. So just want to say thank you, Mark, and really appreciate you taking the time for walking us through this new Regional Homelessness Authority. I'm so excited to have you here, and I really do look forward to our continued partnership.
Thank you, and anytime.
Excellent. Thank you. That concludes our presentations and my briefing at the start about what I've done this year and where we're going. We are technically at time. I want to have staff, if we can extend the time a bit to answer some questions. And then for anyone who does not get their question answered tonight, I will reach out and offer you a time to meet with me directly one-on-one. We will be submitting our monthly questions and answers to the My Ballard blog this week. So again, there's multiple ways for you to ask questions. I don't think that the town hall is the only time that you should be able to have your questions answered by me. So we'll make sure to send out those meeting requests to the folks that answered questions. You can always go on my website and sign up for a meeting whenever you like. We have Mr. On from my office here, who is my committee clerk, who is able to help us facilitate the questions and answers. Mr. On, would you like to take it away?
Sure. I can just jump right in. Our first question is from Steve, and he asks, what is the timeline now for updating Seattle's tree protection ordinance?
That's a great question. This is something that another program that has not been moving fast enough, in part due to the pandemic. Much like CEO Dones mentioned, February 2020 uprooted a lot of the work that we had going. And so as many of you know, I worked to author the resolution outlining the next and final steps to be completed before we see the tree ordinance. I have been told by mayor's staff that we will be expecting a tree ordinance in Q3 of this year, so about September. And what this work is going to do is it's going to make sure that we're reaching out to communities and people who may not have necessarily had their voice heard in the tree preservation conversation. So for especially people of color, Black communities, places that don't have as many trees, these are voices that have not necessarily been represented, and we want to make sure to hear from them before passing and enacting final legislation. I do know that SDCI has hired their consultants to do this work, and that if they had not hired their consultants by this time, I think that I would be looking for other options, because I see them moving forward earnestly. I've been given a timeline that I believe in. I am excited to see this work come forward and legislation transmitted before the next mayor comes into office. So as for the viewing public, once we get to September, there is a budget block at City Council where the City Council only focuses on the budget between September and Thanksgiving. And then we have about a month of additional time for committee in December before we roll into the new year, where we will have a new mayor. So it's important that this legislation be transmitted to council from the mayor's office. And I'm also confident in SDCI in being able to deliver what I've been told will be coming our way.
Perfect. Justin asks, how will the city use funds to help small business in Seattle, especially those that did not qualify for additional funding that restaurants and entertainment venues received?
It's a great question. Thanks, Justin. And so, as you saw in the conversation with Director Noble, there are going to be 2 tranches of funds in the plan that has been transmitted to council at this time. There's going to be that direct small business stabilization grant. So the city had a pot of money that was being used for the small business stabilization grant. We added more money into that during the pandemic. The city council did that. And then now we are adding more money into that grant program. So if you've applied before and didn't get funding or did not apply in the past, please do apply. We'll make sure to add this link into the newsletter that will follow up this town hall. Additionally, there's the second tranche of funding that is going to be going. It is not, the final parameters are not put upon this funding, but it is looking to go. Director Noble spoke really well about this, which is we need money to get into people's hands as fast as possible. We need the government to not wring our hands about how, where, or when these dollars are spent, because we know that you, the residents, the business owners of Seattle, know how to spend your dollars to benefit your bottom line and get us out of this recession and pandemic as fast as possible. So there's a second tranche of dollars that does not have as strong a parameter set on it right now. And we're looking at ways that we're able to either fund groups, neighborhood organizations, chambers, or BIAs with the bottom line of getting dollars to you faster. So feel free to reach out to my office if you're having trouble navigating those different applications. We'd love to help you out. Thanks, Mr. Allen.
All right. Susan has a question, which is, what is the status of the Everspring Inn? Will it be reopened? Is the city planning to use it to house the homeless? If yes, what policies are in place to prevent the return of drug dealing, prostitution, and homicides that have ravaged the neighborhood in the past 10 to 15 years?
Thank you. That's a good question. I brought this question up with Captain Stamfel of the North Precinct the last time I talked to him a couple weeks ago. I do not have a timeline of when it would reopen. As many of you know, there was a long agreement that had to be in place for them to reopen. As part of the agreement was why they were shut down in the first place. And so I don't have a timeline right now. I can tell you that I'm monitoring it. What I can also say is that I have advocated for us to just buy the hotel and turn it into permanent housing. It's not clear that it's the right price point, because again, I don't need to go into all of the details now, just to say that we've looked into all of the options. Can we just buy it for housing to address homelessness now? There is that strong agreement in place that the building owner has to maintain it in a way that is not undermining public safety. Captain Stamfel reminded me that the building owner does own another hotel north of 145th in the Aurora area that does not have the same conditions around it. And then lastly, I want to just really highlight that when the Everspring Hotel was shut down, there were people who had been living there that had no connection to any of the problematic behavior. They had been living there for a very long time. And when the Everspring Hotel was closed down rather quickly, housing options were not provided to them necessarily. So the Public Defenders Association stepped in with a program to get folks who lost their housing at the Everspring Hotel that were not associated with any of the problematic behavior that was just referenced, and able to stabilize them. And the Public Defenders Association did that quickly without additional resources. And I just have to thank them, because had they not done that, I have to be so clear that the problems that were being experienced at the Everspring Hotel would have just been moved out onto the streets throughout the neighborhood. So if there's anyone that you can thank for making sure that problem didn't get worse when the Everspring Hotel was closed down. It's folks like Jesse Rollins at the Public Defenders Association. Thanks, Mr. On.
Thank you. Sarah would like to know, why is West Green Lake Way North between Green Lake and Woodland Park still closed to cars and through traffic? Right now, only people who want to use the dog park can come and go.
Great question. So when there are a number of different situations going on here, so I'm going to just dive into them all. I'll also say that I addressed this question in my morning briefings for the last 2 weeks. So if you want to see how I've spoken about it before, you can watch the council briefing clips that are on my website or on Facebook. Rewinding to the beginning of the pandemic, where we had to have additional space in between each other, even outdoors. West Green Lake Way North was closed in order to provide additional space for people using Green Lake to be able to physically distance in and enjoy the park. There was also construction occurring on West Green Lake Way North. Now, today, we know that we can be closer together. Seattle is one of the most highly vaccinated populations in the entire country, which means that some of those 6-foot physical distancing requirements can be reduced. Additionally, the construction is completed. I had been requesting throughout the entire pandemic from jump that we reopen traffic in a way that people can still get around the lake, and that we can still have that thoroughfare traffic, because I know for a lot of residents, it's your connection down to Stone Way, it's your connection around the lake. The compromise that was provided to me was that we would open traffic in one direction, which was better than nothing, I'll be honest. And so that did happen. We had traffic open in one direction. And then what was happening is that people were driving the wrong way and knowingly ignoring the signs that said "do not enter," and it was so many cars per week were going the wrong way on West Green Lake Way North, which forced it to be shut down. And so I guess this is my plea to you, District 6 residents. If you know your neighbor is driving the wrong way when we're able to reopen that street, please ask them not to, because that safety hazard is what closed the street, closed it rapidly. I'll be honest, I went to Superintendent Agare of the Parks Department and SDOT Director Sam Zimbabwe. I was quite angry that it had closed down so quickly. When they shared with me these safety concerns, I understood why it had to be shut down rapidly. I also asked them to quickly evaluate how we could reopen some traffic to be able to navigate around the lake. Now, here's the other layer to this, which is during the pandemic, wheels, bikes, roller skates, roller blades have been not allowed on the inner trail of Green Lake. Walking Green Lake every week, I know that there's roller bladers and there's roller skaters going around the lake. It is important that we keep bicycles on the outer loop of the lake. Now, we don't have a full bikes don't have a safe place to get around the entire outer rim of the lake, which is why it is important that we maintain two-way protected bike lane or on West Green Lake Way North. We also have the space there to have two-way traffic. So this is a situation where I have requested Superintendent Agare and SDOT Director Sam Zimbabwe to bring to me as quickly as possible a proposal to open up West Green Lake Way North with two-directional traffic and two-directional protected bike lane, so that we are able to, in the long run, keep bikes in a safe place on the outer loop of the lake, opening up more space on the inner loop for runners and walkers, and that we're able to have that connectivity for people who drive their cars on the outside of the lake. So all of that said, we're working on it. I've been advocating for different solutions for over a year now. And I'm excited to see what Superintendent and Director Zimbabwe bring me as a pathway forward to reopening traffic access and protecting and providing a safe place for people to run and bike around the lake too.
Okay, we are nearly 15 minutes over, so I believe that this is the last question that we have time for.
I might ask you for two more, but okay.
Okay. Well, then our third to last question. What is the plan for the homeless encampment on Ballard Commons across from the library? Does the city pick up the garbage? If not, it certainly should. And that was from Marta.
Thanks. That's a good question. The city does pick up garbage there. Both SPU, Seattle Public Libraries, and the Parks Department all have different schedules there. What is needed for Ballard Commons Park is a program like Just Care. Just Care is again, a program that was created and utilized in Pioneer Square to assist some of the people who are hardest to house get into housing, that have access to medically assisted treatment, mental health services, housing services. What we have seen with Just Care is that the populations of people that they were able to move off of the street into a safe place have not returned. So as CEO Mark Jones was discussing, there is a way to remove homeless encampments that do not include sweeps, and this is the way to do it. I've said for so long, in my first 7 weeks of office, there were 7 sweeps within a half mile of Ballard Commons Park. Using dollars in those ways to simply move people around is not a good use of those dollars. And we can't continue to let people sleep outside and be outside. We need to have our parks, our libraries, and our buses utilized for their intended use. And so I was talking to the library today about their needs for the area. I continue to talk to the Parks Department. We continue to advocate for more garbage removal and making as tenable a situation as possible for what is occurring in Ballard Commons Park. Again, Danny Westneat wrote an article just last week, and it summarized some of what I've also been experiencing throughout the district, whether it's the 63rd Street underpass around Green Lake Way, 8th Avenue Northwest, Leary Triangle, Ballard Commons Park. When we as council members make requests, it feels as if it's going into a black hole. Danny Westneat brought up the concerns of both Council President Gonzalez and Councilmember Herbold from West Seattle. And this has been the case for me as well. So because the charter does not give council members implementation authority over departments, we are at the discretion of the departments and the mayor in these areas. And that's why I don't have a timeline for you. If I could bring Just Care to Ballard tomorrow, I absolutely would, because I believe it to be an effective and lasting solution. And it's the solution that we need in Ballard. Thanks, Mr.
Thank you. Tony asks, once the money from the federal government is used up, how does Seattle plan to continue to fund housing for our homeless population?
That's great. So Director Alvarado spoke about the housing levy. We also have mandatory housing affordability dollars. And third, we have the Jumpstart tax that was passed last year that will start, we delayed that tax being levied on businesses until this year so that they could have the time and predictability that they needed to make business decisions. And then we're not going to begin collecting that tax until the end of this year, because again, we have to give businesses the predictability that they need to survive and thrive. And so at the end of this year, we will also have additional dollars coming in from the Jumpstart tax to go directly to housing. So we've got the housing levy, we've got mandatory housing authority, mandatory housing affordability dollars, and then also the Jumpstart dollars all coming in to make sure that we're funding housing at the level that we need to be.
Perfect. And on a related note, your last question here, Peter asks, I'm concerned about new construction benefiting homeowners and developers while pricing out existing Ballard renters. What is the city's role and authority, in your personal perspective, in requiring developers to allocate a portion of new residential units to low-income tenants?
Thank you. It's not an easy apples to oranges, because when, for instance, with townhomes, it is harder to require affordable units in place. With a multifamily building, it's more easy to require those affordable housing units in place. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is that when we receive their in lieu dollars, the dollars that are not that are paid to the city so that they don't have to build the housing on site, we're able to leverage those dollars against state and county grants. And so sometimes we're able to triple or quadruple that dollar that the city has gotten to build housing. So we're able to be more flexible with where we site it to find. Director Alvarado was talking about using publicly owned land. We talk about religiously owned religious institutions land. We talk about sound transit land. And then in addition to that, we oftentimes just purchase land ourselves. So for we need more housing in place. We need those in lieu dollars. And then I'll also just bring this part up, which is that we need more duplexes and triplexes throughout the city. Many areas of Ballard and District 6 have duplexes and triplexes in what is regulated as single family zoning. And it's just important for us to recognize that before the 1970s, zoning was more permissible. So you could have duplexes or triplexes throughout the city. Under single family zoning rules, those duplexes and triplexes are illegal. Now, we're not going to demolish those buildings. So existing buildings get a pass and are able to remain. But for us to be able to allow duplexes and triplexes to be across our city would increase the amount of housing that we have. It would increase the availability of affordable rents, and it would keep the feel and nature of our city, because the buildings that look like homes and just have two doors keep that neighborhood feeling of our community. I actually had during office hours a landlord who owns a duplex that at one point when he first bought it, he lived on one side and rented out the other side, and then now rents both units. He was afraid to make repairs and renovations to the building because he wasn't sure if the permits would be approved and if he would be allowed, because the duplex wasn't allowed in the single family zone. So that's an effort that I'm working on. It is slow as can be. I don't have a timeline at this point because there are a number of legal hurdles that have to be dealt with before any legislative proposals would be brought forward for for duplexes and triplexes across the city. But I just highlighted as it's something that we already have in our community, and it's not a tool that we have available to us today. Thanks, Mr. On. And did you say you're cutting me off? That's my last question.
That was your last question.
Oh, I appreciate. Thank you for that. And for everyone who submitted questions, and I didn't get to your question, we'll be reaching out to you to schedule time during my office hours so you can speak with me directly. You can see my face on camera, or maybe if we're lucky, we'll actually get to meet in person. And that brings me to the point that with the pandemic, we are currently able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're able to see us being able to get out of this tunnel, out of the pandemic. And it's important for us to remember that we are still in the tunnel. We're still in the pandemic. There's not herd immunity at this time. So it is still important for you to wear a mask indoors, make sure you're washing your hands, and do your best to protect public health. Our city, along with the rest of the world, has faced incredible upheaval and trials this last year, and our very definition of normal was challenged. I'm proud of how our city responded. As we look towards reopening and getting back to our lives, I hope that we don't lose the lessons that this year has taught us. And we must be proactive in solving our city's problems. And we must meet these problems at the scale that we face, and we solve for them together. So again, I want to thank you for joining me this evening, or if you're watching at a later date, thank you for watching. I want to say one more time, if you'd like to meet with me, please don't hesitate to sign up for my office hours on my website, or if you want to see any of my briefing videos from the last year, they're on my website, or sign up or read a past newsletter, they're all on my website. I really look forward to meeting with the folks that signed up for questions tonight. And I look forward to meeting with all District 6 residents during my weekly office hours. And until I see you there, good night, District 6, and thank you for joining us.